Official reports from Canada's highest national security agencies are pointing out just how easy it is to manipulate political leadership races and nominations in Canada. It's true. And it's making me think that my already somewhat unconventional stance on what has happened to the Canadian government over the past few months, people have already said, well, I'm not sure if I believe. I think that I haven't gone far enough here and that I need to go a little bit further. And I'm going to tell you why, because, and maybe this is just me, but I think you're going to agree with me, there's something a little bit strange going on right now. Meanwhile, I've also got to give some credit on today's episode, not just for what I think could be a masterful plan, but also for a clear explanation of some of my biggest concerns in Canada and for the West as a whole. Now, you don't hear people point it out too much, so whenever I hear someone with a little bit of notoriety bring it up, well, you got to give a little bit of credit where credit is due. We're going to talk about all of this today, but this is, of course, the Russ Matthews Show. Thank you for joining me. There's lots to talk about today. And if you click this video, you've seen the title already, the fake leadership race, or how to fake a leadership race. And it's an interesting question because there have been some extreme reports saying, well, this is one of the easiest ways to influence Canadian politics, one of the ways that has the least oversight. And there are some things that are making me think that maybe this whole thing is a little bit of a sham, a little bit of a fake leadership race. But I've got to take you back to January. On this very show, we talked about the turmoil that was going on in Canadian politics. We saw this betrayal. This is the official story. This betrayal of Justin Trudeau by his right-hand woman, Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. The whole story was, okay, well, Trudeau was about to fire Freeland, move her from her high-status role into a lower-status role, and bring in Mark Carney to be the new finance minister in Canada. Apparently, again, this is the official story. I'm going to talk to you about what I think the unofficial reality could be here in just a second. The official story is Freeland caught wind of this, that she was going to be fired, and she said, hey, screw you. I'm going to call you into question now. I'm going to say, I don't agree with your gimmicky policies, your gimmicky economic policies, and I think some of the Liberal caucus does not have confidence in you, Trudeau. I'm going to bring you down. This is what Freeland was doing, this big betrayal. And it also threw a wrench in the Prime Minister's plans, again, stated plans, that, okay, he was going to bring in Mark Carney as finance minister for the Liberals. The official story says that, well, Carney heard all this turmoil, all of the sort of shit show that was going on in the Liberal Party, said, I'm going to take a step back from that. I don't want to be involved in that. And Trudeau was forced to put in an entirely different guy into finance minister role. Now, this was the official story that spooked Carney and everything backfired on Trudeau. And in January, I started getting ideas, okay, maybe this story wasn't exactly what it seemed. Perhaps Carney and Freeland were working together in terms of this takedown of Justin Trudeau. I mean, it's both in their benefit, right? Both people with Liberal leadership aspirations. Well, maybe they worked together, and maybe Carney was never going to take the job, and maybe they just worked together to screw over Trudeau. I don't think I went far enough there in that thought, because I've been watching. Well, now we've seen how this is unwound, or how this has developed. We've seen this Liberal leadership race take place. Trudeau says he's going to step down at the end of March, and a new prime minister is going to be instated based on the results of this Liberal leadership race. We saw how this is all played out. But I've been watching the competitors of Mark Carney in this Liberal leadership race, and is it just me, but something feels off. It seems like they're not trying as hard as you would expect them to if they have the chance of being the next Prime Minister of Canada. It seems like they're maybe not even trying at all. Now, I've got to show you this clip here, because when you're campaigning against somebody, the thought would be that you would probably try to point out why you are better than them for the role that you're trying to take on. This is a clip of Chrystia Freeland. I want to show you this because the person who's questioning her here says, well, your party has been surging in the polls, and many people say that's a result of Mark Carney being the presumed next leader. You would think if Freeland wanted to be the next prime minister, wanted to be the next liberal leadership next liberal leader, that she would say, well, here are some problems with Carney. Here's why I am better. We don't hear that. Listen to this, and then we'll talk some more about it.
What we're seeing is, what we're hearing from the pollsters is that your party is gaining ground, which is great, but it seems to be gaining ground if Mark Carney is the leader. So what do you make of that?
Well, I would disagree with that. Yeah. I think there is a whole energy, a new energy in the Liberal Party right now, and that is wonderful. We now have 400,000 Liberal members. That is a great thing.
Sure.
And I think what has really energized Liberals is people are recognizing that this is such a crucial moment for Canada, and they are recognizing that our party is the party to fight for Canada. They're also recognizing, by the way, Pierre Poilievre is not the guy who can do it. He is maple syrup MAGA. All he wants to do is imitate Trump, and I don't think Canadians trust him to stand up to Trump. And so I think that's giving us a lot of energy, and that's why I'm really putting myself forward as the person, as the woman who can do it.
Let's get in the weeds.
So you hear her deflect into talking about how, okay, well, people are just recognizing that because of this big problem of Donald Trump, and because of the view that Poilievre is not going to be great at dealing with him, well, everybody is now just realizing we've got to get the Liberals in here. They're the ones that are the best to take care of us. But you'll notice that it's not really a response to the question that she was asked, which is, well, what do you think of so much success in the polls as a result of polling where Carney is put up against Poilievre? She doesn't go forward and say anything about, oh, maybe Carney's policies are different from mine in this way. I don't like his policies. Here's how I would do things differently. Because she, like, trying to take advantage of this opportunity to differentiate herself, tell these people who are about to be voting why they should vote for her. She doesn't do that. Instead, she takes target at the states and takes target at the Conservatives. You can understand a little bit of the targeting of the Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre. Part of her campaign here is showing that, well, I can be the one to beat him. We should be able to beat him. But despite the host saying, isn't Carney the reason the Liberals are doing well? We see no pushback. Isn't she running against the guy? You would expect some kind of comment. Of course, maybe you don't know this yet, but there are connections, personal family connections, between Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney. Carney is Freeland's son's godfather, so clearly she has a close personal relationship with him. And it makes me think maybe her goal isn't actually to beat him. She's running against him, yeah, absolutely. She's raising the money that you need to go in and to challenge for the spot of Liberal leader. She's running. There is a race here. But maybe the goal isn't to beat him. Perhaps the goal is to give the leadership race more legitimacy. Because if there's just one serious candidate in Mark Carney and nobody else is running against him seriously, well, then people will say, well, was this really a legitimate leadership race? There was no real options here. But to a lot of people who aren't following this extremely closely, they'll see Chrystia Freeland in there and they'll say, hey, that's a familiar face who has been high up in government and she is running to be leader. So if this Carney guy can beat her, well, then that gives him an air of credibility. It says, well, so many people had this other option and they chose Carney. Now, I'm not certain that Chrystia Freeland is a legitimate competitor in this race. And maybe she has been on Team Carney all along. Now, it certainly looks like the other liberal insider who's been running for leadership, Karina Gold. It seems like she also hasn't been putting the best foot forward in a lot of cases. This is a picture of a campaign event that she held in Calgary, one that she didn't show up to. Now, of course, there were legitimate excuses for her not being there. There was the plane crash in Toronto. I think that held her up. If not, it was a weather event or something like this. But if you're just listening to this on audio, by the way, you can listen on Spotify, you can listen on Apple Music, you can listen on Amazon Podcasts as well. Just search the Russ Matthews Show, or you can check it out. The links are in the description of wherever you're listening to this. I'll explain it for you a little bit. It's basically a very small, nearly entirely empty bar. We can see maybe like 9 people there or so, maybe 7. What is it? Yeah, under 10 people in this room where Karina Gold was supposed to be showing up. Look, they could even be there just for trivia, it looks like. Maybe it's trivia night at this bar, a very under-attended trivia night. It's not a very good game of trivia if you're only playing against 10 people. Well, that's what this looks like, a very under-attended night at a bar. And even if Karina Gold had showed up here, even if there were perhaps 10, 20 more people here, it doesn't seem like a serious campaign event. It doesn't seem like you're putting your best foot forward here and trying to look to Canadians like you are a legitimate choice for this liberal leadership position. So we see this. We see Chrystia Freeland's campaign, which hesitates to say anything negative about the person who she's campaigning against, allegedly, and running against, allegedly. No ill will or bad words for the godfather of your son. It makes me question the legitimacy of the race and to what extent all the people in the race truly even want to win, or if they're part of this sort of conglomerate that is all sort of rooting for the same person to win. That person being Mark Carney, the front runner here. Neither candidate, Karina Gold or Freeland, is saying anything negative about Carney, the guy that they're supposed to be running against. And they're definitely giving the race a little bit more legitimacy. More people running means that there's more options, right? It makes a win feel more significant for the eventual winner. But I think that these three are all already on Team Carney. And of course, this would, if true, and of course there's no way to prove it, and that's what makes it such a good strategy. If there's no way to prove that you are all on the same team here, because publicly they're going to say, I tried my best, but I lost fair and square. Oh, well. There's no way that we can really say with certainty that they were actually rooting for Carney to win all along. But if they do lose, which it seems like they're setting themselves up to, I have no doubt that they will each go on to accept significant positions in a new Carney government. Could that be the incentive behind not saying anything negative about the guy? Could that be the incentive of going in as one of his competitors and then not really competing? Could the incentive be, well, we're going to have this debate and we got to give everybody equal airtime. So if half of us are all sort of rooting for one person to win, well, then there's a lot more opportunity for us to take up airtime and not have any of these legitimate criticisms or concerns about the front runner be aired, or at least have less time to air them. So I think that Carney's going to win and they're going to go forward, and these two candidates are going to accept cabinet positions. But it makes me think back to January, this official story that I told you, and even the unofficial one that I told you about how I thought about it, Carney and Freeland teaming up to take down Trudeau. I'm not so convinced that even that is the full story. It personally makes me wonder if Trudeau was in on the whole thing all along, and if the whole Freeland drama, her resignation, her backstabbing of the prime minister as it was framed in the media, and as they, I think, wanted it to look, it seems like that was all staged. I might be getting too cynical here. You might think I'm too tinfoil hat here, but it seems a little bit fishy. Seems like it was all staged to make way for the installation of the leader that everybody wanted, or that Trudeau even wanted to be the next Liberal leader. Like, I wonder if even before December, November, October, if this was in the plans, if this was in the cards. Because the two most serious candidates running against him have both been cabinet ministers of Trudeau, Freeland and Gold. They're in that close inner circle of the people who are in power at the Liberal Party. And there were reports all the while of Carney himself being a chief economic advisor for the prime minister, and likely the prime minister's inner circle, which these cabinet ministers would be a part of. These are all people seen to be on the same team and have been over the past year. I don't think that it's any different right now. Because all of a sudden in December, we have Freeland coming out and saying, I disagree with these gimmicky economic policies, and making it look like there's this big internal power struggle going on. But you got to think from her perspective, if she really had leadership aspirations, really wanted to be the next Prime Minister of Canada, this is the easiest route to be the Prime Minister. You don't have to go through any formal election here. All you have to do is win the Liberal leadership race. Would you be saying that all of these economic policies are gimmicky? These aren't great economic policies? Because you, as Chrystia Freeland, have been incredibly tied to these economic policies all along. You've either been in on them, or you've at the very least been co-signing all of these policies. So saying that your big problem with the Prime Minister is his economic policy all of a sudden, it's not the most believable. I don't know, it smells fishy to me. Maybe you think I'm being too cynical. Let me know in the comments wherever you're listening to this. But this whole thing gets a lot more interesting when you look at the Liberal leadership candidates who weren't part of that cabinet, weren't part of this three of Karina Gold, Mark Carney, and Chrystia Freeland. When you start looking at the other people who are now in this race and the way that they've been treated over the past month as this race has gone on, it gets a lot more interesting. We saw a man named Chandra Arya, I believe is the pronunciation, Chandra Arya, who was trying to run and was trying to get this role of Liberal leader. Now, I don't think he would have been a successful candidate, if I'm being honest with you. He no French language skills, which would be a big problem in Quebec. Maybe he'd still be able to convince them that that's not important, whatever. But this person who was the very first one to say, hey, I'm going to run, he now shares my concerns about the legitimacy of the Liberal leadership race. He's a sitting Liberal member of Parliament, and he's worried about the legitimacy of the race. Let me read you this quote from this article. And I quote, a spokesperson from the Liberal Party confirmed that Arya's disqualification on the basis of a section in the party's Liberal leadership rules allowing prospective candidates to be banned or barred if they are deemed manifestly unfit for office of the leader. This can cover a broad range of factors like public statements, past improper conduct, a lack of commitment to democracy, or other reputational or legal jeopardy. Now, this clause in the Liberal Party's rules has allowed a centralized group of people at the center of the Liberal Party to say, well, we don't want this person running. Because we're saying behind the scenes that this person is not fit for the office of the leader. So we're just going to ban him from being able to run at all. Now, in the wake of this, after he had already started his campaign formally, Arya, this sitting Liberal member of Parliament, is saying, well, this raises significant questions about the legitimacy of the leadership race, and by extension, the legitimacy of the next Prime Minister of Canada. Because this isn't just to see who's the leader of the party. Trudeau is stepping down, and this person will be taking their place as Prime Minister without a vote cast by the public. And it's happened once, I believe, before in Canada's history. But I find it interesting, this questioning of the legitimacy of the race by even people who are sitting Liberal members of Parliament. And it reminds me of something that came out about a year ago. You might not remember it, but I think you're going to be pretty shocked when you hear the details of this. Because in a very, very important report that was released about a year ago, a completely nonpartisan, not Liberal, not Conservative, not NDP dominated report that came out. It was a report to look into foreign interference. It was called the NSICOP report. NSICOP is the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. It was this big group that was put together when the government and the public realized, hey, we've got national security agencies that are collecting all of this intelligence, all of this intel about people, places, and all issues around the world, but we have no way of actually being able to know the details of this because of national security clearance issues. People can't know about the details of this reporting. So this National Security Committee, Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, I'll say that 10 times fast. I can't even say it 10 times, or I can't even say it once. It was put together so that they could all get the top level security clearance, come together and create reports to tell the public as much as they can. There's a lot of redacted stuff. Tell the public what is going on and what the biggest concerns are to alleviate these concerns of election interference. But not only election interference, also interference in leadership races and nomination races. This was really, really interesting when I brought it up. You might remember the context of about a year and a half ago or so. There was a Liberal member of Parliament who sort of recused himself from the role after reporting from the Globe, or Global News, I believe it was, said, okay, this person has been... There was some funny business going on with how he got his role as a member of Parliament. Talk of bussing in people from out of the area to vote for him when it came time for the nomination process of who would be representing the Liberal Party in a given riding that historically always goes to the Liberals. This is Han Dong. Let me show you this report because it applies not only to the situation with Han Dong, but also to the extremely vulnerable system we have for choosing the leader of various political parties. This is note number 69 from this NSICOP report that was released just last year, I believe, or I guess maybe it was in 23. It says, in the period under review, foreign actors covertly supported or opposed candidates by exploiting vulnerabilities in political party governance and administration. This included interfering with nomination processes or attempting to influence or control electoral district associations. CSIS considers the nomination process to be a particularly soft target for several reasons. First, many ridings are considered safe seats. So winning the nomination is akin to winning the subsequent election without having to interfere in the election itself. This is what allegedly happened with Han Dong because Liberals were a shoo-in to win in this riding of Don Valley North. Every single time they win in this riding. So the real decision of who becomes the member of Parliament, the person in power for that area, is not the election itself. It's gone Liberal every single time for so many elections. Liberals always win here. The real question becomes who gets the nomination to represent the Liberals in that riding, because that is ultimately what's determining who will get that seat. Do you see where I'm going here? This is what CSIS is worried about. And they're worried about it because this nomination process, and I'll continue here from the NSICOP report, this nomination process these nomination processes are not directly regulated or safeguarded by federal, provincial, or territorial legislation or enforcement bodies, such as the Commissioner of Canada Elections. As a result, the likelihood and consequences of the detection of such activities are low. If you meddle with the nomination process, well, nobody's looking. There's no regulatory oversight. Nobody's checking out if there's funny business going on in this nomination level. As a result, the likelihood and consequences of the detection of such activities are low. Unlike Australia and the United Kingdom, Canada does not criminalize interfering in nominations, leadership races, or any other political party process. This is all talking about automatic win ridings in Canada and how big an issue that is. Because if you have, like I've just been saying, if you have a riding in Canada that always goes one way, the election doesn't matter. It's always going to go one way. What matters is the nomination process. But they extend this also to leadership races. And that's where I find this whole funny business with it seeming like this is kind of a fake leadership race to see who's going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. CSIS itself has documented how soft a target, how exposed Canada is because of the lack of oversight for how these leadership selection processes actually roll out. It's a big issue because we can't see why Chandra Arya got pushed out from this campaign. Again, I'll reiterate, I don't think he was ever going to win, even if they let him. I don't think that he had much of a shot. But I have issue with the precedent that sets. He gets pushed out with no recourse. He can't go back and say, well, no, there's these legal rules. No, there's these procedures you got to go through. You got to provide me with some proof. No, instead, it's a centralized group of powerful people inside of the Liberal Party that are deciding, well, we will just label him and use this tool that we have to say he's unfit for office based on no specific evidence, no specific details about why this is the case. We're going to say he's unfit for office, and there's nothing he can do about it. We can just push this person out of the race, which is especially interesting when you consider that he was the Liberal candidate for the riding that he sits in. I don't know the name of it. And he is a sitting member of Parliament. So what does that say? That the Liberal leadership inside the party thinks that this guy isn't fit for office, yet he's still the sitting member of Parliament for your party. That's a little bit questionable in my eyes. But it's not just Chandra Arya. I think it was just yesterday, Ruby Dalla was, who is another Liberal leadership candidate, the one who's seen most as an outsider, isn't an MP, just like Mark Carney is not an MP currently. Well, she was questioned by these same Liberal high-up leaders inside of the Liberal Party and their lawyers. Now, she got a call yesterday morning, and this is based on reporting from the Globe and Mail. Sources say that some of the questions that were asked of Ruby Dalla involve possible foreign interference in her leadership campaign from the Indian government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This is the Prime Minister of India. The Liberal leaders are saying, we've got some big questions for you, Ruby Dalla. We don't know that you should be running in this Liberal leadership race because we're saying that there's some foreign interference going on here. We have reason to believe that you have been sort of persuaded by the Indian government to run. And again, could be true. We have no way of knowing. There's no oversight. There's no transparency for where these allegations are coming from. But personally, I don't buy these foreign interference allegations, not because they're not true. I just don't think that they're good ways to discredit people anymore. I think it's lost a lot of credibility. Because let's get real here for a second. We have no reason to believe that this isn't happening to some extent with every single candidate in every single party. We have such a lack of transparency and so much evidence from these reports that national security agencies are trying to tell us there are some big problems going on here. But there's no transparency that would give anyone the confidence that this isn't happening in a widespread way, be it in conservative leadership races or nomination processes, or in liberal ones at NDP. There's a lot of influence coming from outside of the country as to who gets positions where and when. But of course, it is convenient for the government to be able to make claims like this, to be able to say, well, we could prove it. We could prove that you are being interfered with by a foreign power. We could prove it, but our hands are kind of tied. Sorry about it. Our hands are tied because of secrecy laws around national security. We can't share this information because it would be hurting our national security interests. So you can make the allegations that somebody is being interfered with or someone's campaign is not legitimate. You, a group of only a few people at the top of power inside of a given political party, you can say whatever you want and not have to back it up because you can make these national security claims saying that you don't have to provide any evidence because you can't legally. Sorry, hands are tied. It would be violating security laws. It's certainly convenient that is the way that things are laid out currently. And it's certainly convenient that there's no need for oversight and there's no transparency to the public about how all of this is run. Now, my personal call would be we need more oversight. We need some regulations here. Elections, at the very least, have all of these task forces and panels. People think that they're effective to varying degrees. Some people are convinced that they're not effective at all and that there has been a lot of interference in our actual elections. But this isn't about the actual elections. This is about the leadership race, a very significant leadership race at this moment, which will determine who is the next Prime Minister of Canada. There probably hasn't been a more consequential leadership race. This, as well as the concerns about individual ridings being sort of handpicked, who will be the one that is in power there. But then we got to talk a little bit about the media as well in this whole thing, what I am more and more believing is a sham of a leadership race. I believe that there's been one person selected here, and that's the person that's going to win. And there's people running to provide legitimacy to make it look like there's a race here. But based on the lack of criticism of the front runner candidate, it seems like all the ducks are getting in line right now. And I get curious about the way the media talks about it as well. And it's not without reason. I'll go back to this same report, this NSICOP report that came out just a couple of years ago. In short, the report says that foreign governments are interfering with Canadian media content via direct engagement with Canadian media executives and journalists. And then it describes a specific instance, but it's redacted to remove all of the specific information. It goes on to say that 6 sentences were deleted to remove injurious or privileged information from this report. And these sentences described examples of how the PRC pays to publish media articles without attribution for that payment, as well as sponsoring media travel, pressuring journalists to withdraw articles, and creating false accounts on social media to spread disinformation. Remember, this is from the NSICOP report, the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, a group of conservatives, liberals, NDP, Green, Bloc, MPs who have gotten together and said, okay, let's go above party here and let's warn people about what's going on in Canada, going on in all parties. We're talking about this in the context of the Liberals right now because that's what's going on right now. But this, make no mistake, this is not only in this instance. It seems to be a lot more widespread. But is that not mind-boggling to you? Foreign governments interfering with Canadian media content via engagement with Canadian media executives and journalists. Is that engagement direct payment? A quid pro quo? If you do this, we'll help you with this other interest that you have. There have even been reports of blackmail situation where, hey, you wouldn't want this getting out. You wouldn't want this information, maybe this footage we have of you. Maybe this information about your past that only we have access to. You certainly wouldn't want that getting out, would you? So maybe you should act in our interests. And this example is about China, but I think it's a lot of major powers. I have no doubt that there's some interference coming from the States, from India as well has been reported. From all sides, this seems to be happening. And it makes me feel like a crazy person. Maybe you sympathize with this. Maybe you feel as crazy as me sometimes, but I have a very hard time as a result of reports like this in being certain that anything is true. If you have major media organizations that seem to be compromised in some way based on reports like these from Canada's national security agencies, how can you be certain that anything that you're hearing is true? Certainly on the mainstream media, the media that's owned by either Bell or Rogers, right? These telecom companies, the American-owned news media that operates in Canada, all of this. How are you supposed to know what is real and what is not? Now, this hasn't gotten out widely to a lot of Canadians. I think, well, when you hear allegations about the media, certainly the media is not going to really want to report that, are they? But you could say, okay, well, maybe I don't get all of my news from mainstream media, typical legacy media. I go on Reddit, I go on Twitter, I go on all these online places, and I get a good idea from a bunch of different people what they think, and I kind of put that all together, and I sort of see what a lot of people are saying, and in my head, that kind of like gives me a better idea of what the consensus opinion is in the world. Maybe you didn't hear me the first time. Let me go back to this quote. It talks about the paying and pressuring of journalists to withdraw articles and whatnot. But the last sentence is the creation of false accounts on social media to spread disinformation. So even if you're not on legacy media, even if you're not only getting your news from one source, centralized source beamed to you from your TV, even if you feel like you're tech forward and progressive in your ability to parse through the information of this world, that's kind of the camp that I feel like I'm in. Like, I feel like I have a good ability to look at a bunch of different sources and to get a good idea. But then you hear this about the creation of social media, extra social media accounts, like bots populating all of these social media platforms. I'm scrolling Twitter sometimes and I see some wild stuff there, some wild opinions, some wild perspectives that I'm like, this can't be real. Is this a real person? Is there anyone out there that really thinks like this? I find myself asking myself as I talk to the many voices in my head, clearly. But then you think, okay, how am I certain that this person is even real? I think that listening to maybe this is serving my own interests as a video and audio platform, but I think you got to start being really, really skeptical of people that only post tweets or people that only are commenting on Reddit. You see a consensus of a bunch of different stuff saying all similar opinions or varying opinions, but along the same way. You can't be certain that isn't interference trying to, like some sort of psyop, trying to make you think some type of way, trying to shift your perspective that, well, I thought that this was a crazy way to think, but I've just seen 20 people in a thread on X talking about how actually they all view things the same way. So maybe I should take a step back and reevaluate the way that I think about things. But no, you can't even do that because there's no telling if those people are actually people or if they're bots. Like, I've talked on the channel about how I'm a little bit skeptical of the extreme powers of AI that we hear talking. I think a lot of it is big investment firms investing a lot of money in AI and AI infrastructure and then making everybody think that this is going to be the biggest thing in the world forever, which as a result increases their investment values. I think that has a lot to do with a lot of the AI extreme takes that you hear. But there's no question that AI has improved quite a lot, especially when it comes to text, especially when it comes to sounding like a human. And it's entirely possible that there are hundreds of thousands of bots on every single social media platform being powered and being pushed in a certain direction to astroturf. Have you heard this term before? Astroturf. The idea, you've heard the idea, of course, of grassroots politics, right? Getting a big groundswell of all these people. And wow, it's incredible that my political message has resonated with so many people, individual people that have all come together in this grassroots way to support me. Now, astroturfing is the faking of that phenomenon. Makes sense, right? AstroTurf, fake grass, fake grassroots, AstroTurf. Now, this has been done for a long time through different companies and non-government organizations and charities, things like this, with less than transparent funding, creating all kinds of advertisements, campaigns, to try to make people think a certain way. But now with this growth of AI and with the clear reporting that there are bots on a lot of these social media platforms where we are all getting our news more and more as we turn away from the legacy media, this is the new world of astroturfing. People that look like real people, these are all different social media accounts, but really there's no real way of being able to discern or knowing if they are a real person or if they are just an AI-powered bot who has been part of a group of 100,000 bots sent out to reply to each other and talk to each other in this way to make it look to people on the outside like, hey, there really is this grassroots movement of people that think and believe these things. All of this really screws me up in my head. Like, how are you supposed to know anything is real? You hear about this post-truth world that we're living in, and people will say, well, that's so dangerous to be able to be talking like that. But how do you know what's true? How do you know what's false when the media is compromised and when independent media is also very hard to distinguish from this astroturfing that we're talking about? I think more and more you got to be going to people where you can see their face. You can talk to them. Like, hey, for all you know, I could be paid by some foreign government to be talking the way that I'm talking, but at least you know that I'm a human. But like, I look at like if you're not listening on Apple Music or Amazon Podcasts or Spotify, which you can go check out the show there, Russ Matthews show. If you're not listening there, you can see me. Look at all these fingers I'm moving. Like, do you think AI could do that? Video generation and audio generation? Like, that's pretty complex as I wiggle my fingers in front of the camera. I think you got to be turning more and more to personalities that you know are real people. Sure, they could be wrong. I'm probably wrong about a lot of stuff. But listen to me, listen to other people, and based off of what you hear from the real people that you can watch and listen to, make up your mind based on putting together all of that information. Because apart from that, how else can you really make sense of the world these days? We've gotten a little bit off of the topic of this fake or seemingly fake liberal leadership race. So let's get back to it. Don't get me wrong. I think, and you might be shocked to hear this because of the criticism I've levied towards him, I think that Carney is by far the best candidate for the Liberals if they want a chance of winning this next election. By far, there is no better candidate than him to lead the Liberal Party because he is the manifestation of the existing institutions. He probably knows better than anybody how they work. Without a doubt, he knows better than anyone how all of these existing institutions work. Look at the resume. Look at the resume. Central banker in Canada, central banker for the Bank of England. And then you like, he knows macroeconomics. He's got the best macroeconomic resume. This is what people will say. He knows about big investments because he worked at Goldman Sachs for 13 years. It's an incredible resume, one of like the highest positions in finance you could ever hope to achieve for yourself. So if you have faith in the institutions that this guy has been at the top of, if you have faith in those institutions of Western society, and if you have faith that those institutions are really serving the interests of the people that those institutions govern, whether they like it or not, well, then this is absolutely the right guy for the job. He knows macroeconomics. He knows central banking. He knows how that system operates. He knows the investment banking world from working at Goldman Sachs. He knows all about this stuff. And if you think that all of those institutions are good and are important, that Canadians have trust in them, well, then this is the guy for the job, and he's a great candidate in your eyes. And he might beat Poilievre. I think it's more of a question of what percentage of Canadians think that this existing order that we live in has actually been serving them, and what extent, how many people think that having the perfect operator for the existing system will make their lives better, and what percentage of people think that, well, actually, this system has not been serving me. The central bankers, the investment banking organizations, it seems that the wealthiest keep on getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, and corporations keep on getting their interest looked after by these international central bankers and central banker organizations. It seems like everything kind of always works out for them. Things don't always work out for the average person. How many people are thinking like that? If you're watching this, maybe you think like that, maybe you don't, but at least now you can get the perspective of where each of these sides are coming from. And we're going to be looking at this as it evolves. The debate between these Liberal leadership candidates is February 25th. And my guess is that there's going to be little to no criticism of Carney, just as we've seen from Gold and Freeland. They haven't taken the gloves off at all. Do they even really want the role? We will soon find out. As I take another sip of coffee, we got more to get into, folks. Because personally, I'm not sure where I stand on every institution like this, like we've been talking about. I'm not, and maybe this will surprise you, I'm not in the we need to burn everything down, fully burn everything down to the ground, rebuild something. I think in those cases, you probably end up building a similar system that just serves a different group of people. But if there is one thing that I watch most carefully, and you'll know this if you follow the YouTube channel, Russell Matthews, there's one thing that I do follow, and there is one thing that I've gotten more and more and more skeptical of the more and more I've studied it, and it's the incredible centralized power of central banks worldwide and how they seem to represent the interests of multinational corporations and not average people. This is the way that I see things at the moment. Meanwhile, those organizations are entirely unaccountable to the people who their policy decisions most impact. People's lives are affected by these people, and nobody's ever cast a vote for them. You don't hear that a lot from our politicians. You don't hear talk about that. Maybe they think, okay, well, if I talk about central banking and things like this, people's eyes are going to glaze over. They're not going to care. I'm in this to get votes. Let me just say I'm going to do a middle-class tax cut. Let me just say that I'm going to improve the healthcare system. Let me just say these things that are ideas that everybody kind of has an idea about. That'll make more impact. So when I do hear a politician talking about this stuff, it perks my ears up. Now, I'm going to play you a clip from Pierre Poilievre, an interview that came out just last week. I don't agree with everything that this guy says, but I've got to give credit to any politician where it's due, when they talk about this, which in my eyes is my biggest impact issue that nobody talks about. I got to give credit. If I heard Carney come out and say, hey, you know what? As a central banker, I know how the central banking world works. In times of crisis, central banks have made a lot of big decisions that have ended up impacting people for better or for worse. We were faced with a set of extremely challenging decisions, and we, this centralized group of central bankers, made the decision that we thought was best for people. There have been side effects, but we believe that the side effects have been outweighed by the benefits that people have felt. If he came out and said that, I would have a lot more respect for him. And I would give credit for that. If he said, yes, there's a trade-off here because central banks and these organizations, well, they're centralized, they're unelected, but we do need that kind of power to steer the country in times of crisis because of the way that the political system can get bogged down. I'd say that's a fair argument. I'll take that. But nobody's talking even like that in defense of these organizations. So when I hear anyone even bring up these ideas, I'm surprised. Pleasantly surprised. And that's why I want to play you this clip. This was just last week. I think it was on Friday of last week this interview came out. But we actually hear a politician talking about the real side effects that people have felt as a result of the decisions made by people that they didn't elect. Decisions that have, in my personal opinion, made a big impact on the quality of life for Canadians. Listen in.
That was going to happen, and walk us through what exactly did happen with the printing of money.
Well, it's a very simple mathematical problem that we've known about for millennia, and it's the correlation between the growth in the money supply as a share of GDP and the cost of things. And if you look at Milton Friedman's amazing tomb, it's like a big brick of the monetary history of the United States. He puts in graphs of countries around the world, and he can show like a near perfect correlation between the growth in the money supply per unit of economic output and the inflation rate. And so what happens is you have the same number of goods and services, but more money chasing those goods and services, you get inflation. So what I saw happening in 2020, 2021, 2022 was that the central bank was buying government debt and effectively creating additional cash. And the result was that our money supply grew by about $500 billion, or about 30%, during which time the real output of our economy actually declined. So you had a lot more money buying a lot less goods. And it stood to reason that that was going to result in inflation. You know, all the central bankers, including Mark Carney, said, oh no, that's just simple thinking. Money printing doesn't cause inflation. Well, of course.
I got to pause it there and make a couple comments here, because I agree with a lot of this to a T. There are some things that I don't agree with. I think that a lot of people that I've talked to, and we're going to go back to this clip and play the rest of it in a minute here. A lot of people that I've talked to are saying, you know, I'm so sick of hearing about this post-pandemic inflation. Every single country around the world had it. And Pierre Poilievre tries to make it sound like it was just inflation. This is one of his catchphrases that he used when inflation was peaking at around 8%, saying that this is all Trudeau's fault. It's so frustrating. I hear people say this to me when I talk to them about it. Every single country dealt with this. How come he's trying to put it squarely on the shoulders of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, that he was the cause for all of this? And I think there's some points in there that are fair, some are not so much. It's true that every country that printed money, every country that used quantitative easing, this tool to prop up economies as the pandemic shut down economies, central bankers used this tool to prop up the economy and make sure that there was an economy to go back to after the pandemic was finished. This is the argument that they made, that actually this money printing was a good idea because we saved the economy. We allowed for people to go back to jobs when we reopened. That's fair. This wasn't something that just happened in Canada. It's not something that is uniquely the fault of Justin Trudeau. It's more of a questioning of the policy in general. Just because every single country does the same thing doesn't mean that that is the right choice. And sure, it's not Trudeau's fault, just like it wasn't Biden's fault when we saw inflation in America. I think it's the fault of the policy decisions by central bankers worldwide, who often will act in lockstep, as they're all part of the same international organizations, chiefly the Bank of International Settlements, this sort of conglomerate that is outside the jurisdiction of any country, cannot be persecuted in any way. They are this think tank that comes to a consensus so that all central bankers can tackle the issues of their individual countries with the insight of the international central banking community. These decisions are made here and spread throughout the rest of the world. The question is not whose fault is this inside of Canada that prices have gone up, that asset prices have inflated, that people can't afford homes. The question is, why are we giving so much power to unelected officials to make these decisions? Even if those decisions were the right ones, and economically now we are in a better position than we would have been if we didn't do this money printing, the discussion needs to be had, and you don't hear people talking about it. Let's continue with the clip.
It did. And then we spent the last 2 years, our middle working class.
I remember. Let me get back to this. He just prior in this clip, before I paused it the last time, he said that central bankers like Mark Carney said at the time that, hey, inflation is not created by the creation of new money via central bank policy. And I think that at the time when they were saying this, they may have actually believed it. They might have believed it because there was a whole bunch of printing that went on after the great financial crisis in 2008, 3 different rounds of it, pioneered by Ben Bernanke at the Federal Reserve in the States. And they didn't see consumer price inflation for a very long time there, even though there was all this money printing. So it would stand to reason that, well, actually, maybe the creation of so much new money doesn't actually result in consumer price inflation. Of course, they did see extreme inflation when it came to asset prices, the things that the wealthy own, assets like real estate, stocks, the creation of the entire cryptocurrency industry was sort of spawned off of this financial crisis and the subsequent money printing and the questioning of, is that the right move? Is that really what we want to be doing? But they didn't see any consumer price inflation, so consumers just thought, hey, well, this is good. It seems like everyone's happy because the economy is doing well, I guess, or at least stock prices are up. And I'm not having to pay that much more for my goods or my services. So who's really hurt here at the end of the day? Who's really even hurt? I could see why people would start to think this. Now, what you don't consider is that all throughout 2008 up until 2019, when we saw everything change at the end of 2019, early 2020, all throughout this time we were experiencing even more industrialization and globalization of foreign nations, which caused a deflationary pressure on the goods and services that we purchase, right? When you can offshore all your manufacturing and all your labor to places with extremely almost slave-like conditions, well, then you can produce things more cheaply. Americans and Canadians and Western nations can buy things for a lot less because of this globalization. So simultaneously, we have this deflationary event paired with the typical inflationary event of printing a bunch of money. So I think that these two things sort of counteracted each other in a way where central banks thought, well, actually, we didn't print it. We printed a bunch of money, didn't see any consumer price inflation, so maybe we don't need to worry about this quite as much. So they go into the pandemic, and this is where you get a little tinfoil hat theory-ish. There were reasons that, in my previous video on the channel, we talk about this. There are some reasons that they kind of needed to start printing some money right before the pandemic happened, and then the pandemic gave them an excuse to print a bunch of money. And maybe they even thought that, hey, we're going to force everybody to stay inside of their homes for an extended duration. We're going to print all of this money. And because everybody's at home, we're not going to see that added demand, and we're not going to see inflation because we're just keeping everybody at home. They're not going to be buying things. Maybe we can avoid inflation this time with this money printing too, while bailing out asset prices and large multinational corporations that now are going to benefit from extremely low interest rates and a huge amount of money added to the system. So you can understand why some people might have thought, well, money printing doesn't actually cause inflation. But you're wrong. 2022, every single nation saw this inflation.
The last 2 years, working class people spent the last year or 2 years suffering with this affliction. So the inflation is actually just the symptom. The real disease is overspending. Governments don't print money for fun. They print it so they can spend it. It's the sneakiest way to raise taxes without actually holding a vote. It'd be like, raising the GST 3 or 4 points. You'd get thrown out of office for that. But if you just tell the central bank to do a bunch of backroom hocus pocus that no one can understand, call it quantitative easing, you can sneak it under the radar. And that's what they did. And so what I'm saying is stop the spending that's driving the money printing. You need to cut bureaucracy, cut the consultants, cut foreign aid, cut back on corporate welfare, these checks we give corporations when they should be raising their own money through free enterprise. And then you don't have to print money, and you can protect the purchasing power of your dollar.
It's frustrating because
so interesting stuff there. He draws a more of a correlation than I would between government spending and money printing, right? And I think it gives a lot of people a false impression that any kind of government spending results in more money printing and results in direct inflation, because anytime the government spends, you have to print money to support that. That's not true. That's not the case. When there is extreme spending, emergency spending, like in the pandemic, well, then central banks do support government spending because they purchase a bunch of bonds, and those government bonds are the way that the government takes on debt. So when new money is used to purchase those bonds, well, the government is able to borrow for extremely, extremely cheap, and they don't actually need any real world buyers of that debt because their own central bank will buy that debt. That is what becomes inflationary. But this gives a little bit of the false perspective or false idea that I think a lot of people have in their heads, that anytime the government spends, it's inflationary. No. Anytime central banks print money or create money to purchase government debt and to monetize that debt, that's where we get inflationary events. So sure, spending less will help us not need to use the central banks in this way. Sure, if you can reduce government spending to a large degree, that could reduce the money printing that's needed. But like I said, I started this segment saying I want to give credit for where credit is due for talking about this stuff. I think it is really important. But there also isn't a solution provided, which I find frustrating, because I would like to hear a solution. Not that I have a great one, because yeah, you can say, well, we should never have printed money at all. But then what would you have done instead? What would have happened during the pandemic? What would have happened? Would you have just not done anything and let all these financial markets collapse, the real estate market collapse? It could have happened. We'll never know. Would you have just let the free markets do everything and while simultaneously keeping people at home? Because health organizations around the world were saying that was the only way that we could deal with this pandemic. Would you have let this economic scarring happen? Now, I think that maybe there needed to be a more measured response to the pandemic in its entirety. Maybe we didn't need to keep healthy, young people with incredible immune systems at home, your working age population at home the entirety of that time. You certainly wouldn't have needed to print as much money to support the social programs that helped prop up the economy if you actually had an economy continuing to happen, continuing to go round and round. So maybe that's a potential solution, right? But you don't hear the here's what I would have done instead. You can say now we got to stop the money printing at a time when we're not really needing to do that. It's easier to say. But when faced with a crisis point like this, would you have really done that? Or are you just kind of saying this stuff? And then next time there's some sort of black swan event, next time there's risk that financial markets could go belly up, next time there's risks that the real estate bubble could pop. I'm not fully convinced that Poilievre would be able to handle this situation without deferring to the central banks and the organizations that ultimately will bail out big corporations, but will convince you and every other politician that they're actually doing this to save the economy because you don't want a crashing economy on your record as the politician that's in power right now. It's a complex web of how all this stuff works, and we're trying to uncover it here. And thank you for joining me as I've said this a couple times, but as I think descend into a little bit more madness every day, I don't know if I'm getting more clear on what's going on in the world or getting less clear. I'm certainly getting more skeptical, and maybe you're with me. Let me know what you think of this episode. What do you think of this Liberal leadership race? It seems to me that there is one candidate that is going to win. It was always that candidate, and perhaps that even the candidates that are running against this anointed leader, the preordained selected leader, it seems like they're not even really trying. Do you think that I'm right on that, or am I misreading something? Do you agree with Poilievre's stuff that he said here in this interview? What do you think about all of that? Subscribe to the channel, by the way, if you haven't already done so. YouTube is where this primarily comes out. It's just a simple click. That's all I ask for you. All I ask of you. I put out my hand and say, please, sir, just one simple click. Please, ma'am. I think I make pretty good content. I don't hear a lot of people talking about this stuff, so I appreciate the click and the support. It doesn't cost you a dime. It doesn't sign you up for anything. It only helps me out and helps out the channel. So I appreciate you doing that. And while you're at it, follow and review this podcast, the Russ Matthews Show, on Spotify. Follow us on Apple Music and on Amazon Music, I believe, or all of the podcast platforms. The main ones, you can find this show there. Maybe you want to listen in your car, get frustrated about the Canadian political environment, just as I do, while you're driving your car, not having YouTube ads or something like that. Go check out the show there. And I'll remind you, as cynical as we can get in these shows and as little faith as I have that things are going to turn around, these are big macro events. These are big worldwide things. And if you get your head too focused on that all the time, you're not going to have a very good life. Even if all of this is true and is accurate, you got to find other stuff to focus on as well. So I encourage you, go out, get some exercise, lift some weights, maybe find a sport to play, spend some time with your loved ones, and forget about this stuff from time to time, because I worry that if there's people out there that this is all you're thinking about all the time, I don't think that's healthy for anybody to be on such a one-track state of mind. So I encourage you to break out of that. It's important to know about this stuff. Listen to the show, check it out, but recognize the good things in your life and look around and say, hey, you know what? Even though there's all this bullshit going on, I've got these good things, and then you got to focus on those things to help them multiply. That's the way I think it. Maybe that's a little airy-fairy for you, but that's the way I think about things. With all that said, thanks for listening to the show, and I will catch you next time.